The gospel lesson for the morning is found in the first chapter of the gospel according to St. Mark, beginning at the 29th verse, where we hear these words. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. And that evening at sunset, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door. And he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and cast out many demons, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. In the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out into the deserted place, and there he prayed. And Simon and his companions hunted for him. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns, so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. This is the word of God for the people of God. Please be seated. Sue Buchanan tells a story about her father, who was a pastor in one of those small southern towns. I grew up in small southern towns. I told somebody I was 15 years old before I lived in a town that had a fast food restaurant. That's not a lie. That's not a lie. I mean, my father served every one-stop-like town in South Carolina, I think, before we landed. And she tells a story about her pastor father in this town. It seems that his granddaughter, her daughter, Dana, for whatever reason, was afraid of sirens. Now, you and I think about sirens from ambulances and fire trucks and police cars, but in small southern towns, there was a siren. It was probably connected to one of the factories, and at noon every day, the siren went off. Maybe you remember that. No, some of you too young. But I remember that. I remember it well. In Union, South Carolina, there were about 5 textile mills, and every one had its own siren, and they had to time those things so they all went at once. And the whole town, you could hear it for miles around. It was everywhere. 12 o'clock every day. Well, Dana was scared of the sirens. And her grandfather talked to her. He was the pastor of the church, and he was explaining to her that there was nothing to be afraid of and that it was all right. He said, "Let me give you some advice." He said, "When the siren goes off, it means it's lunchtime. So when the siren goes off, you jump up and say, 'Hey, everybody, it's lunchtime. Let's go home.'" All right, she got the message. She started doing that, practiced for a few days. The fear seemed to subside because she had something to associate with those sirens, and it helped her, and it helped her a lot. Well, on Sunday morning, she goes to church, and her grandfather's preaching. And as some preachers are wont to do, he got carried away, and he preached past noon. And at 12 o'clock, the siren went off. And Dana jumped up, turned around, looked at the congregation, said, "Hey, everybody, it's lunchtime. Let's go home." And they did. Don't get any ideas. I don't want you to go home to get your lunch. That comes later. I do want you to grasp something of the source of power that makes the Word of God prevail. This is an important word. It matters. I want you to grasp where refreshment comes from, where renewal comes from. A power that is at the immediate disposal of those who know and trust God. It is always available. It was even available to Jesus. In the midst of his ministry, even the Son of God needed time to be renewed. Everybody does. In the morning, while it was still very dark, says the Scriptures, he got up and went out to a deserted place, and there he prayed. Now that's the key. That's the key. Let's re-examine the text for this morning. Now, before our reading began, there's a whole host of things that have already happened in this particular story. We started at the 29th verse of the first chapter of Mark. But listen to what happened that same day before our reading takes up. He entered the synagogue and he taught. And I know what that means. That's exhausting. You're responsible for people. You're responsible for their understanding. You're responsible for developing them. And when it's over, you've put everything you've got into it and you're tired. Well, he did that first. But there was a man with a demon in the synagogue. Thank God that doesn't happen anymore. But it happened then. And Jesus called the demon out. You see, in Mark there's this strange little twist that no one has quite ever understood called the messianic secret. All the way through there is this need for people, not to know that he's the Son of God. And so this demon is saying, I know who you are. You are the Holy One of God. And Jesus is saying, shut up. And he calls the demon out. And the unclean spirit left him. And he was healed. Now we pick up the story in our reading where Mark writes, they left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew. Now, same day, just a little while later, Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever. They told him about her, and he took her by the hand and lifted her up, and the fever left her. The second healing. And they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city was gathered around the door, and he cured many who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. A third healing. What a day. By the end of that day, he's exhausted. There is nothing left. All he wants to do is collapse someplace. But Mark says, in the morning, while it was still very dark, he got up and went out to a deserted place. And there he prayed. Because strength doesn't come from sleep. It comes from being connected to the power. And the power belongs to God. In the midst of all his activity, Jesus rose early and he went to a deserted place so he could pray. I can't imagine what it would be like to have had his role, to have healed people and then deal with the continual expectations of everybody else. A couple of weeks ago we were talking about Jesus' call of disciples, and I wondered to myself, I wonder how many people Jesus called who said no thank you. You don't hear that in the Bible. Mark and Matthew and Luke, they don't tell you that story. They tell you about the success stories. But how many people didn't say yes to that? Well, we're kind of in the same place here today with this idea. Wonder how many people could not be healed because they refused the help of Jesus. Prayer. In the midst of all his activity, prayer is at the core of what Jesus does. Prayer is the extension cord that connects us to the power of God. It's the hookup that makes the light come on when we've been living in darkness. It's the power for life. It's the seatbelt of life. It's the thing that helps you hang on when you can't hang on otherwise. And it's breath for our souls. There was a news clipping which appeared in the papers after a blackout in this particular city. Now, I would not guarantee you that it wasn't a misprint. It might have been totally misunderstood. But this is what it said. Whether it's a mistake or whether it's true, this is what it said. It said that during the power failure, many people complained of having gotten stuck on the escalator. I knew it would take a minute. Of having gotten stuck. Do you know the source of strength and power? If not, find a deserted place. Be still and know. Stand with